So, thank you very much, Dominic. So, as an engineer working in financial industry, blockchain to me is a very, very interesting piece of software. Being a consumer myself in the digital area, I'm thrilled by the outlook that blockchain may change completely how I will be enabled to do transactions with companies, with governments, or even with other individuals. Talking for an insurer, I mean, we are also thrilled because we see the opportunity to make our services faster, more transparent, and more convenient to our customers. But still, blockchain is a very, very complex concept to grasp. And so I'm very honored that we have Alex Tapscott here with us. He's a renowned investor and a tech guru. He's just published the book, The Blockchain Revolution, a bestseller, and he's the perfect person to introduce us to this concept. Alex, please, to the stage. And afterwards, we discuss.
Thank you, Michael, for that warm introduction. This is a very exciting time to be a leader, not just in the financial services industry, but in every business, institution, in society, because it appears that the technology likely to have the greatest impact the next 20 years or so has arrived. And it's not the social web, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, or the Internet of Things, though these are all significant in their own right. It's the technology behind cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, and it's called the blockchain. We have become convinced that this technology represents nothing short of the second generation of the Internet, and as a result, think it will have a profound impact on money, business, government, and society. So when you use the Internet today to move or send or share information, you're not actually sending an original, you're sending a copy. And generally speaking, that's a good thing. In fact, it's one of the great advantages of the Internet. We have this publishing platform that allows us all to access the world's information. It's democratized access to information, and that's a really good thing. But when it comes to things of value, like money or financial assets, sending a copy is a really bad idea. If I give you $20 in payment for something, it's really important that you know that you have it and I don't. And that everyone here can trust that you have it and I don't. Because if I could send the same $20 to every single person in this room, that $20 becomes worthless, the global economy collapses, and I go to jail. And those are all bad outcomes. So it turns out we need help. This old joke on the Internet, no one knows you're a dog, actually turned out to be true, at least when it comes to doing business online. Establishing trust and verifying the identity of any individual on the Internet proved to be a difficult task. So as a result, we have to rely on intermediaries, middlemen, who perform a whole bunch of important functions. They verify the identity of counterparties in a transaction. They establish trust between those two counterparties. They perform the transaction logic of business, the clearing and the settling and the movement of financial assets and all assets. And they keep records that can be independently audited or verified after the fact. And generally speaking, these intermediaries do an okay job, but with very serious limitations. For one, they're all centralized. And anything that's centralized is vulnerable to hacking or attack or outright failure. Just ask any customer of LinkedIn, JP Morgan, Target, Home Depot, any employee of the NSA or the State Department, or anybody who, for that matter, lived below 49th Street in New York City during Hurricane Sandy when the centralized power station collapsed. They capture a large amount of the value in transactions. They tax the system. So for example, when you send money overseas, it can cost anywhere between 10, 15%. It's probably cheaper and faster for me to send an anvil from Toronto to Munich than it is for me to send $100. They capture our data, which not only prevents us from monetizing it and organizing our affairs, using it to help us run our lives better, but also potentially undermining our privacy in the process. They take a long time to do things, and that's because the infrastructure of a lot of intermediaries, specifically in financial services, are built using technology that's older than I am. They run mainframe computers from the 1970s. That's true of some of the largest financial systems in the world, like SWIFT or the automated clearinghouse that the Federal Reserve runs. In some, you could argue that they capture an asymmetric amount of value that's been created during the first generation of the digital age, perhaps even more so than they did during the pre-digital age. What if there were a vast, global, distributed platform that was accessible to anyone and ran on millions of computers, not one system, but was spread out, distributed around the world, where not just information, but literally anything of value, money, stocks, bonds, titles, deeds, intellectual property, scientific discoveries, creative content with specific licensing rights, even votes in an election could be moved, stored, managed, and recorded securely, and where trust was not established by an intermediary, by a third party, but rather through mass collaboration and clever code. Well, in 2008, the global economy was on the brink of collapse, and somewhat propitiously, an anonymous group of persons, or one person under the name Satoshi Nakamoto, released a white paper outlining a new technology. It was digital cash for the internet. It enabled people to make payments peer-to-peer in the same way that you might make a payment peer-to-peer using cash. You know, you go out and buy Wiener Schnitzel and a pretzel, and you give the guy $10 or $15. He's not asking for your driver's license. You don't need to use the Visa network. It just happens peer-to-peer. So could you create that kind of technology for the internet? And he launched it, and it worked. And since then, this technology has set a spark, which has spread from the world of technology into financial services, media, government, and many other industries. Bitcoin, has everyone heard of Bitcoin here? Just raise your hand if you've heard of Bitcoin. Well, you have now, because I just mentioned it. Bitcoin is many things to many people. It's an asset. It goes up, it goes down, you can buy it, you can sell it, you can make money on it. And that's interesting if you're a speculator or you're looking for another way to save your money. More interestingly, it's a cryptocurrency, not issued or controlled by a government or by a government organization. And that's really interesting. You know, we benefit in Europe and in Canada and the United States from a stable currency, and a relatively efficient financial market, but in many parts of the world, the local currency is very unreliable, and moving money across borders can be extremely cumbersome and expensive. So if you live in Venezuela, for example, and the currency is collapsing, or in China, where there are strict capital controls and there's no alternative to move your money around, then Bitcoin is very attractive. Most interestingly, though, is that it's based on this technology called the blockchain. So for the first time in human history, two or more parties can transact and do business with each other without having to rely on a third party, a broker, an intermediary. Rather than trust being established by a bank or a technology firm or by a government, it's established through this technology. And that's why we like to call blockchain the trust protocol, because trust is native to this technology. If the first generation of the internet was the internet of information, the second generation is the internet of value, a new medium for money. So how does all this stuff work? Well, it starts with a distributed ledger, kind of like a big spreadsheet showing what has occurred over time, transactions. And it's shared on many computers all around the world. Transactions that are happening on this network are validated by a community of participants. They're not validated by Visa or bank or government, by a community who commit computing resources to solve complex problems. And in doing so, basically validate the transactions. For their work, they are rewarded. In the case of the Bitcoin blockchain, which is one of many, they're rewarded with more Bitcoin, but there are other ways that they can be rewarded. As these transactions are happening all over the network, every so often they're batched into these things called blocks. Each block is tied to the last block and must reference the last block. And this is the big invention. Because what that means is if I wanted to send the same $20 to someone else, I wouldn't just have to go back and rewrite one transaction. I'd have to rewrite every transaction all the way back to the beginning of commerce on the blockchain. And I wouldn't have all day to do it. I'd have to do it in a very short period of time, fighting against this community of computers, which is, by some estimates, the largest computing resource in the world, 5 to 20 times as large as Google's server farms put together. That's a very difficult thing to do. And finally, they're timestamped. So any attempt to alter when a certain transaction has occurred will immediately be spotted by the network and canceled out. And Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain is just the beginning. So who here has heard of Ethereum? Raise your hand. All right, that's pretty good. So Ethereum was developed, actually it's a Canadian success story, so I'll spend a moment talking about it. An entrepreneur named Vitalik Buterin decided that he liked the idea of peer-to-peer payments, but he thought that the Bitcoin blockchain was limited. It only really handled money. What he wanted to do was enable people to write contracts, to bargain, to do complex business processes peer-to-peer without an intermediary. And so he decided to write a white paper, launch this protocol, and do a little crowd sale to raise some money for his little project. He's a 20-year-old college dropout, lives in Toronto, Canada. In a matter of weeks, he raised $18 million US, making it the largest crowd sale in history at the time. And 12 months later, it's worth $1.5 billion, and it's widely used by companies like Microsoft, Deloitte, Manulife Financial, UBS, and many others. So before I go on, another interesting little story. We posited when we were writing the book that technology like blockchain could enable you to think differently about how you organize a company, that maybe you could automate certain functions of the company like management, governance, through the use of these smart contracts and through the use of distributed trust. Rather than relying on individuals, we could rely on technology. And at the time, we thought that was kind of a far-out idea, this idea of a managementless company or a people-less company. But we decided to include it because we thought that it was feasible. The day we launched it, the book in North America, this thing called the DAO, Distributed Autonomous Organization, came into existence. It has no home office, it has no management team, it has no board of directors, it has no employees, and in 3 weeks it raised $150 million, making it the largest crowd sale now by an order of magnitude, about 8 times what the second largest was. This is a company that has no people. It's just software that runs on a blockchain. So you know the old Bob Dylan song, there's something going on and you don't know what it is. So what about the financial services industry? Does anybody know what that is up there? Probably has a different name in German. In English, it's a Rube Goldberg machine. Basically this complex apparatus that does a whole bunch of difficult, unnecessary things, and at the end it solves a simple problem like it cracks an egg or closes a door or something like that. This is basically how the financial services system works. In many respects, not in all respects. But think about it, you go to Starbucks, and I did this when I landed here to the airport, and I tapped my card on the card reader, and the payment appeared to me to be frictionless. And you would assume that the value, the €3 went from my bank account to Starbucks' bank account like that in an instant. It didn't. It went through a series of different intermediaries, my bank, their bank, credit card processing company, the Visa network, a clearing and settling house, probably the SWIFT network, which connects, it's a communication network that connects North America, Europe, and the rest of the world. And Starbucks won't get that money for 4 or 5 days, not before 6 different intermediaries have captured part of the value called the interchange. And this is actually an efficient version of how the financial service system works. There are others that are significantly less efficient. And it turns out every single part of the industry will be impacted by this technology. We decided to break down the industry. It's a complicated industry. People don't really understand what it does. Supports a global economy of $100 trillion, moves lots of money around. Its leaders are known as the masters of the universe. What exactly does the financial services system do? We think it does 8 things. It gives people and institutions and companies a way to move value, move money around, make payments, a way to store value, to save, a way to get access to credit, to access the debt markets, either for an individual or for a corporation, a way to get access to growth equity, to connect entrepreneurs with willing investors, a way to insure against catastrophic risk, a way to make markets and securities and other financial assets, and a way to account for and audit what's happened inside an organization. And in each of those instances, there's an opportunity for blockchain to transform the industry. And given the potential, it's no small wonder why a lot of big publications and other notable stakeholders are waking up to this opportunity. The Economist ran a cover story in October of last year calling blockchain the great chain of being sure about things, the trust machine. And they didn't say that it was one of the most significant inventions of the last 20 years. They said it was one of the most significant inventions of the last 200 years, along with double-entry bookkeeping and the joint stock corporation. Now, admittedly, double-entry bookkeeping is not the sexiest thing imaginable. You know, it's like double-entry. But it's kind of important. It's the reason that we have, you know, what we have today. And given the potential of blockchain, it's no small wonder why a lot of leaders in business and government and civil society are trying to figure out just what the heck's going on here. And I see some younger faces and some older faces in the room. So, you know, some of you are Dilbert in this cartoon, and some of you are the boss. You know who you are. So the boss comes in. I think we should build a blockchain. Uh-oh. Does he understand what he said, or is it something you read in a trade magazine ad? What color would you like your blockchain? I think mauve has the most RAM. So there's still a bit of confusion about what this means. And what I'd like to do today is to not discuss everything in the book, but to focus on one specific theme. Because, to be sure, financial services will be transformed by this technology, but it's one of only 7 key themes that we identify in the book. And the one that matters to everyone here, regardless of the industry you're in, is this question of prosperity. So you look back on the first generation of the internet, and it's done a lot of extraordinary things. It's revolutionized the way we share information, how we communicate. I can do a long-distance, high-definition video conference call with a friend on the other side of the earth for free. I mean, that is an incredible invention. But if you look at certain metrics that matter, namely prosperity, the idea that the rising tide of technology lifts all boats. Maybe not all equally, but it lifts all boats. It has a decidedly mixed track record. You know, the #1 policy issue in Canada right now, and in the US and in a lot of parts of Europe, is this idea of income inequality and wealth inequality. You've got people in the global south who don't have access to any form of financial services, and so have not participated at all in the benefits of globalization. And for the first time in the modern era, the 51st percentile, the middle class, which has always gotten ahead, regardless of the disruptions that have occurred, is starting to slip back. How could blockchain change that? Well, for one, 2 billion people out of the 7 and change billion people in the world don't have access to financial services of any kind. Now, it's mostly a developing world problem, but it's also problematic in certain parts of the developed world. You know, so in the United States, 45 million adults. So what's that? 2/3 the population of Germany don't have access to any form of financial services. They cash their checks at money marts and street corners and in grocery stores. And in large parts of the world, people have zero access. Afghanistan, 9% of people have access to financial services. Most people just exist in the cash economy. And one of the biggest problems is that in order to access a bank account or to access a financial services institution, you need 2 things. You need a balance, because they won't go after you if you have no money. What's the point, right? But also you need identity. You need a way to prove who you are. A passport, a driver's license, a utility bill, a birth certificate. And most people, most of those 2 billion people that don't have access to financial services don't have a way of proving who they are. And banks can't service them. So blockchain technology can change that. #1, identity is something that's normally issued and managed by the state. You get a state-issued license, you get a state-issued birth certificate. There is an opportunity here to use this technology to allow people to bootstrap an identity. And what I mean by that is that you might have a reputation in your community. Maybe you can use that reputation to get access to a microloan. And once you've gotten access to that microloan and paid it back, that record will appear in this ledger. And it will be proof that you act with integrity and that you pay back your debts. That might enable you to get access to a bigger microloan, which might enable you to get access to a bank account, which might enable you to make payments, save money, get a loan, start a business, et cetera. And then on the financial services side, we're seeing this explosion of innovation that is causing banks to no longer be the dominant monopolistic force that they once were. New startups in the fintech world are making it easier for people to access financial services. Number two, protecting rights through immutable records. There's a famous Peruvian economist named Hernando de Soto who actually argues that financial inclusion is not the big precondition for wealth creation. It's actually land titles. So 70% of the people in the world who think they own land actually have a very flaky title to that land, meaning that it's unenforced or unenforceable. And this is true in large parts of the world. So for example, in Honduras, lots of people had a piece of paper that said they own land. The corrupt government said, I know you think you own the land, but my government server, which I've just changed unilaterally, says that my friends own the land. And you have to get off the land because they're going to build a beach house. And that actually led to a change in government. Now the new government is working with a blockchain company called Factum to develop a land title registry on the blockchain. I mean, imagine if every time there was a change in title, it was recorded to a ledger that everyone could see and access, and that no one single corrupt force could alter. That would enable people to know with much greater confidence that they actually own land. And this is true in large parts of the world. The Olympics are right around the corner in Rio de Janeiro. They evicted tens of thousands of people from favelas around the surrounding area. Some people didn't have title. Some people did have title. It didn't really matter because the government came in and said your title's unenforceable and we're kicking you off your land to build a stadium to enrich the people who own the construction companies. And now, Dilma is out of office. So these kinds of things can create big political problems. Could we use blockchain to create a true sharing economy? These companies like Uber and Airbnb, they're called sharing economy companies, but they actually have very little to do with sharing. They're service aggregators. They aggregate excess capacity through a centralized entity. It's called a corporation. They're worth $65 billion not because they share, but because they aggregate. And they sell that to a willing market, in the process capturing a big chunk of the fee, but more importantly, keeping the value. The equity value of this enterprise is owned by a small select group of people. So could we use blockchain to create a true sharing economy? In the book, we postulate that you could have a blockchain Airbnb or a blockchain Uber, where rather than people owning cars just exist in a commons, and every time you need a ride, you would log in, the app would know exactly what your preconditions are. You want to take a toll road, you want an SUV, you need room for 3 people. It would pick you up, it would negotiate that in a contract that would happen on software. There's a native payment system that would enable you to make a payment peer-to-peer, either to the car itself, or to whoever is the owner of the car. And because you've been on this app for a while, it's got a reputation score, which is recorded to this record that you can't alter, which gives you a way to identify or to prove that you're reliable, either as a driver or as a fare. And this is something that applies to every company in the sharing economy, and Airbnb knows this, and that's why 2 weeks ago they bought a blockchain company so that they could begin developing this. Ending the remittance ripoff. So the largest flow of funds from the developed world into the developing world is not foreign aid, it's not direct foreign investment, it's remittances. Money that is sent home from diasporas living abroad to their ancestral lands, right? So in Canada, we are the largest net remitter per capita in the world. Canadians send tens of billions of dollars every single year to their families, mainly in China, India, and the Philippines. $600 billion a year. The average fees are 10%. So that's $60 billion that's not reaching people who actually really need that money. You know, in the Philippines, remittances are 13% of the GDP of the entire country. It's just money that's sent home. In Haiti, it's 25%. So, a quick story. There's a housekeeper in Toronto. Her name is Annalie Domingo. And for 30 years, she's been dutifully getting her paycheck, taking it to the bank. I know this because I joined her on one of these trips. Taking it to the bank, withdrawing $200 in cash, getting on a bus, going to the other side of town from where she lives, where she goes to a Western Union counter. Now, when we went, it was payday, so 20 other people had the same idea, so we ended up waiting in line for an hour. We got to the front. She filled out a paper form that she's filled out every month for 25 years and handed over a wad of physical cash. Money goes into the system. It doesn't arrive the next day or the next 2 days. It arrives 4 to 7 days later. Her mom, who's 70, doesn't have any real idea when it's going to arrive, and that causes all sorts of problems. And in fact, there's a whole cottage industry in places like Kenya and the Philippines for stick-up artists that go and pick people off on their way back from Western Union counters because they're flush with cash. So 6 months ago, Annalie downloaded an app called Abra, which uses the Bitcoin blockchain to move money across the world seamlessly and frictionlessly. And rather than paying 10% and it taking 5 to 7 days, she does it and it takes 5 seconds, and it costs 1/4%. Now, someone on the other end her mom's got virtual pesos on her phone. So what Abra has done is add a sharing economy model around it, where she can swap that virtual peso for physical pesos with a teller, which are basically guys that ride around on motorcycles that will do that trade for 1 or 2%. So the whole process takes an hour or so. It costs 1.25 to 2%, rather than taking 5 to 7 days and costing 10%. That's a big difference, of course. The virtual you. The big data class the big asset class that's been created during the digital age is data. It's the most important asset class to this economy that we live in, kind of like industrial plant was in the industrial age or land was in the agricultural age. But the funny thing is, we all create it. We don't own it. It's owned by Facebook. It's owned by Uber. It's owned by your government. It's owned by Google and other intermediaries. And they know you better than you know you. You don't know a year ago exactly what you said, exactly where you went, exactly what you bought. But the virtual you does, the virtual you owned by intermediaries. So right now there are companies who are working on identity programs that would enable you to take back your data and to use only small slivers of that data in transactions. And the intermediary would know that the data you own is reliable because it's from a blockchain. So you buy something online. The guy on the other end of the transaction doesn't need to necessarily know who you are. You go buy the pretzel. The guy doesn't ask for your driver's license, right? There are all sorts of examples of things where you don't need to disclose or volunteer all this data. And I think that could have big implications for privacy, but it could also be a big opportunity for businesses as well. I'm going to get the hook here pretty soon, but a couple more to go. Drag me off if you can. So I bet you this is something that matters to a lot of people in the room, which is ensuring creators of content get fairly compensated. Creators of content have never really had a good deal. The record labels took huge parts of the value during the record label industry, and technology made things worse. We added new intermediaries to the mix: digital download companies, streaming companies like Spotify, new financial intermediaries that allowed you to do transactions online. And now, today, artists are fed up. It's like the Oscars. They're going to play that music, So if you wrote a hit single in the 1980s, sold 1 million copies, you can make $45,000. If you get 1 million streams on Spotify of that same song, you expect to make about $37. Not enough to get you to the airport. So now companies like Mycelia, STEM, Ujo Music, Mycelia run by Imogen Heap, are using blockchain to imbue songs with intelligence like licensing rights and royalty rights, where every time a song is listened to, the value moves peer-to-peer from whoever's consuming it to the creator of the content. They get fed first, and then they decide how everyone else gets paid. And the final one, almost done, the final one, reinventing government. These are two books that came out, Osborne and Gabler's Reinventing Government and the Gore Report on Reinventing Government, 1992 and 1993. Good timing, right? World Wide Web is right around the corner. How would technology change the way that governments interact with citizens and deliver services? You know what? I don't think they've done that much to change over the past 20 years. There's digital wallpaper to a lot of this stuff. They've paved the cow path, as they say. They've taken what they did before, they've put it online. But have they really changed the deep architecture? I don't think so. Well, in two ways blockchain can change this. Number one, transparency is a good thing. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. And the more information that's out in the open about how governments act and whether or not they act on behalf of citizens, the better they'll be, the more accountable they'll be. Equally as important, essential services like healthcare, welfare, the procurement of tax, and other payments to government can be done significantly more efficiently with this technology. So those are 7 transformations, but I don't want you to think that this technology is a panacea. It's not a solution to all the world's problems. In fact, in the book, we have an entire chapter dedicated to all the things that might go wrong to prevent this technology from reaching its potential. And each of them are very significant. But in doing the research, we asked ourselves, is this a reason why blockchain is a bad idea? Or are these implementation challenges to be overcome? And every single time, they landed in the second bucket. You know, blockchain is a job killer. I think blockchain could enable entrepreneurs to create companies more easily because it lowers the barriers to inclusion, but it could just as easily disintermediate a lot of people from financial services, from law, and from other industries. I think that technology, in that instance, is not the solution to that problem. It's not the creator of that problem, but there needs to be a policy response from government. So it seems that, once again, the technology genie has been unleashed from the bottle. Summoned by an unknown person or persons at an uncertain time in history, this technology is at our disposal to transform the economic power grid and the old order of human affairs, to fix industries, to transform government, and to create prosperity in the world, if we will it. Technology is a tool. It requires leadership. You've all self-selected by being here to learn about big things that are happening in the world, how they might affect you. And you don't need to be the CEO of a company or the president or the prime minister of a country to lead. Leadership can come from anywhere. So I hope you'll check it out, and please join the revolution. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Alex. And I think it is obvious that this is such a fascinating topic that you can't really stop going through all the ideas that make it so valuable. For us from Allianz, we see this as an enormous opportunity to simplify insurance, to make it more transparent, more convenient. But if I imagine I close my insurance on a blockchain, basically immediately getting the cover and the benefits, but this is a public blockchain, is my data still safe?
Shall we sit?
Let's sit down.
So, short answer, yes. Long answer, it's complicated. And it's complicated in this way. The Bitcoin blockchain is one of many blockchains. And different blockchains can have different characteristics. There are ones that are completely open and completely decentralized, like the Bitcoin blockchain. And there are others that are more centralized. So, for example, IBM has its own blockchain. It's called Hyperledger, and it counts as its members most of the big financial services firms in the world. And it wants to develop customized solutions for different companies. So one of the refrains that we get from banks often is, I can't trust an anonymous network of volunteers to validate transactions in my business because I don't know them. And it's not that I don't trust them, it's that I actually might not be able to do it. Here's why. There are rules, and the financial services industry is heavily regulated, and there are rules called Know Your Customer rules. And Know Your Customer rules apply to vendors as well. So you need to know a little bit about your technology company that's helping you out. And if you don't know anything about these random people in the world who are helping you to run your business, then the government might crack down on you. So that has led to the creation of these private consortium blockchains, which would be more secure from a data privacy standpoint, but would be less functional because they don't have the network effects of something like an open blockchain. It reminds me of the first generation of the internet, the difference between an intranet and an internet. That in the early 90s, every big firm wanted their own intranet, that people could communicate and move files internally seamlessly, but they didn't want to open up to this big open network because they were scared of it. Well, today, the internet, the public, open platform, is clearly dominant. And I think that it's likely that that will happen as well with blockchain.
Yeah, I understand. And I mean, if following your story, that basically we already see the dawn of the post-Uber economy. So basically, digital revolution eating its own children. This will certainly create a race for who owns which blockchain standard. I mean, for us, probably it means if it is there for the benefit of the consumer, there is a public interest to have kind of open standards for blockchain as well, right?
Well, one of the things on the showstopper slide that I said was, how do you govern this whole thing? Governance, a lot of the early founders in this technology space were very anti-government. They're libertarian types. And they think that any attempt to put some rules around this ecosystem is bad. And they're wrong, of course. The internet is a good analogy. The internet is governed today by a diverse group of multi-stakeholder networks that each are responsible for a different part of the governance. You've got ICANN, which delivers services, the Internet Engineering Task Force, which manages questions of technical standards. You've got the Internet Society, which is an advocate and a policy network. So there are going to be standards questions for all sorts of things. Standards questions for insurance claims, standards questions for the trading of financial assets, standards questions around smart contracts. And if everyone's running around like cats, coming up with their own platform, their own standard, it's going to slow the growth in the ecosystem. So governance is required. The good news is that anybody can join a governance network if it's bottom up and it's open. So Allianz, if they're interested, could help to develop all sorts of these kinds of things in conjunction with everyone else.
Yeah. Now, there's obviously some homework to be done. I mean, we're actively working on utilizing blockchain to be more efficient. One quick final question. What is your take? How many years it will need until blockchain is kind of a common transactional instrument like internet is now used for communication?
Well, today, over 10 million people use Bitcoin. Cryptocurrencies are accepted in hundreds of thousands of merchants. Every single bank in the world is using this technology at varying stages, either from pilot level all the way to reinventing their infrastructure. And you've got examples like the DAO, where a software agent went and raised more money than most companies that are VC-backed could ever hope to raise. So you could argue that it's already happening. When will it begin to affect everyone in this room? I think the future's not something to be predicted. It's something to be achieved. But if I were to venture a guess, I'd say in the next 18 months, your lives will be affected in a profound way, in a way that you might not know. All of a sudden, if you're sending money to family overseas, you might do it at 1% rather than 10%. When you go into Spotify, in the background, you might not know, but artists might finally be getting compensated fairly. If you're a journalist and you're publishing articles, you might know that every time they're copied and pasted and repurposed that you're actually going to get fairly compensated. In Germany, solar panels are a big deal, right? You got a lot of solar panels. Do people have it on their roofs?
Yeah.
Okay. So the big issue with this is that you generate excess electricity more than you need. You sell it back into the grid at a wholesale rate. The grid pays you a tenth of what it's actually worth. And they can only accept so much because you can't push too many electrons back the opposite way. Right now in the US, there are whole neighborhoods in Brooklyn that run on a distributed power grid where if you generate extra electrons, you can sell them peer-to-peer using blockchain to your neighbor across the street without having to go through the centralized intermediary. So all you need is a little bit of political will and an enterprising company. And in 2 years, that could be the standard in Germany, for all I know. So these kinds of things are happening. They're happening in many different industries. And they're happening at a faster rate than they were during the internet age.
Very good. So 18 months, that's not far away. So let's start working on it.
All right.
Thanks a lot, Alex.
Thank you,
That was
Michael.
a great presentation.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.